Long before Steve Irwin and before the Bush Tucker Man, there were the Leyland Brothers. And they were making these wonderful films about Australia.
Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leyland Brothers.
G'day, I'm Mal Leyland from Ask the Leyland Brothers. Now, this week's letter here is rather unusual. It's from Australian Story. In fact, it says for 13 years now, we've been asking you if I could tell my story on your program. Okay, well tonight that's what we're going to do.
Berries have been in. We're very frantic. I've got to cook cakes and pies and pasties and quiches all today.
Start mixing the pastry.
No, I'm doing lasagna first. We're opening a cafe at the RSL at Mullaney. I'm excited about the new adventure and we're opening nights tonight and I'm nervous.
I never imagined I'd ever be in this position. I thought our future was all tied up, financially secure, because we had so many millions of dollars invested. Didn't expect to lose it all in one hit. I think people probably, they do ask the obvious question like, why are you doing this? They don't quite understand. They think that if you've been on television all your life, you've got a huge estate and plenty of money. Why would you want to go and sell cakes and biscuits?
Urgently need Land Rover clutch plate Series 2. Require water also if possible. And the signature Leyland Brothers. That's Lima Echo Yankee Lima Alpha November Delta Brothers.
Their travel documentaries over the past 30 years made the Leyland Brothers household names. Hundreds of hours of television, tens of thousands of kilometres over the countryside.
Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leyland Brothers.
Since their debut on Australian television in 1963, the Leyland Brothers have become cultural icons.
Everyone knew, wait for it, travel all over the countryside, ask the Leyland Brothers. Everyone knew that song. It was incredibly popular. Millions and millions of Australians watched the show every night.
Our first story comes from Western Australia.
Lots of people ask us how we got on as brothers. I mean, we were together for 30 odd years and we obviously had our misunderstandings and differences of opinion, but mostly when you're out in the bush, you can't really afford to do that.
They were true brothers. They almost talked one after the other. They loved what they were doing together, and I could never imagine a time that they wouldn't remain as close siblings. It was amazing to me when 10 years later I heard there'd been a major falling out.
This is the first time that I've publicly spoken about what happened to the Leyland Brothers and why Mike and I went our separate ways.
What does he say, Mike?
We made a conscious effort to make sure that people thought we were still travelling together. We did the odd story together. We didn't want people to feel as though that we were actually ready to rip each other's throats out. But I look back on our life as brothers as being pretty special. We had something unique. A lot of people think of us as being a pair of Aussie blokes who just grew up in the suburbs of Australia, but in fact we started out in England. So we're the original 10-pound pom family. Well, I think the reason Mike and I ended up as close as we were was because Dad got into real estate and moved around from one suburb to the next. As a result, we changed schools so much. We didn't really get enough time to make good friends, so we became each other's best mate.
1956 was a very big year for me and for Australia because that was the year of the Olympic Games in Melbourne. I entered a competition that was a drawing competition to go to the Olympic Games. And Dad said to me, if you win that competition, son, I'll buy you a movie camera. And he did. He bought me this camera because I won the trip to the Olympic Games.
The very first film we ever shot was at the Olympic Games. And that's how we got into shooting films. And we ended up filming little home movies of things that we did, you know, holiday trips and stuff like that. we used to sit there and plan to be the Warner Brothers of Australia.
Our first major goal on the trip was to reach Lake Eyre.
I went with Mike and Mal on their first couple of trips. Mike wanted to get a film ready because television was starting to come to Australia. Mike had always been very keen on becoming a professional cameraman. And because they were English, everything they saw was fascinating to them because they weren't used to it. And they just absorbed it and they just wanted to know more and more about all things Australian.
These days, some people might think it offensive that we climbed the rock, but in 1961, not many people made the trip and everyone did it.
We had fallen in love with the desert and become completely charmed by Ayers Rock. We'd made a movie too, an amateur movie, The Lure of the Centre. Mike showed Lure of the Centre to the news editor and landed the job of Channel 3's first news cameraman. For a while, Mike and I were rivals. Using this camera, I started work as a cadet photographer with the afternoon daily paper here, the Newcastle Sun. But the rivalry didn't last long. With only 1 year's professional experience, we joined forces to make our first commercial film.
And all the books that I'd read said the secret to selling a documentary was to actually do something for the first time. So I picked up a map of Australia and thought, well, what can we do that's not going to be too expensive and too far away? And looked at New South Wales and there was this Wrigley line going through it and it was the Darling River. And no one had done it, and it was 1,400 miles.
We had no idea what we were letting ourselves in for. And so inexperienced were we never even had a pair of oars with us. We had an outboard motor only. And it gave us trouble, kept breaking the propellers.
Then we thought, well, if we get some baked bean tins and tip the baked beans out, we could flatten the tin out and cut it to some sort of shape resembling a propeller.
We managed to sell our Down the Darling film to the Nine network. The film became so popular, it was repeated within 2 weeks and got huge audiences. There isn't any doubt that the success of Down the Darling prompted us to believe that we could make a living out of doing it.
Adventurers who are actually going out and paying for their adventure by selling the film to a television station. It was just unique in those days. One of the inspirations for me to get into documentary filmmaking, I've always been an adventurer, but was basically to follow in the footsteps of the Leyland Brothers. I thought if they can do it and make money out of it, surely I can.
5 young Australians set out on an expedition never made before. A journey across a waterless continent.
But we had to come up with something better, something that no one had done before. And that's when we decided we'll go right across Australia from one side to the other, and on the way we had to cross the Simpson Desert.
Ahead lies 300 miles of hard slogging over Simpson sandhills, with no water holes at all.
I think the most spectacular, most impressive thing we saw was Ayers Rock in the rain. We were there, we arrived on one day and it was bright and sunny. And then next day at port we had 6 inches of rain, and this broke the 8-year drought.
One tourist in 100,000 has seen such water spilling from Ayers Rock, and no cine cameraman has ever filmed it until now.
Nobody had ever filmed an event like this before. Those pictures became the most famous ones I ever took. We decided we would roadshow the film. We'd take it around the country and hire town halls, cinemas if we could, and advertise it ourselves and see how we went.
With everybody said I was mad, you know, I was throwing the money down the drain, advertising it and putting it on. And in Newcastle, the theatre manager said, you know, 2 days will finish it.
It's a big, big country that we live in. It's a big, big country, I say.
And at the end of 2 weeks season, we'd recovered $15,000, enough money to buy 3 houses at the time.
We've just come back from the Kimberleys, shooting a new series called Off the Beaten Track. We were away about 6 months, did 16,000 miles.
And that's when we started calling
vehicles.
ourselves the Leyland Brothers.
And we had a bit of a rough time, didn't we?
No, we had a few breakdowns and Land Rovers rolling over and things like this.
But we've come now to sort of accept these as part of the business, really. That's what makes our films interesting, I think.
Mike and Mal, as brothers, had the most strong relationship that I've ever seen between two people ever.
We then moved on to make a new television series called Ask the Leyland Brothers.
That was a program where viewers wrote in and asked us to film anything, anywhere in Australia, and we travelled there to film it. And we're going out to Rat's Nest, Ireland, in answer to this request. We travel with our wives now in 2 vehicles, and we all work together as a team. Just Mike does all the camera work, I do the sound. Another good item is a well-equipped picnic set.
Both of the girls were attractive girls. Both Mike and Mal were a bit sexist, and so they used their wives as a draw card.
Before we look at packing, consider saving weight in the food department. Dehydrated food is good, but only in areas where you can get lots of water.
I got pushed in front of the camera, you know. Talk to these people. What about? But I learnt to start asking questions and that.
Oh, purple bottles. How are they always purple like that?
I had to learn to cook on an open fire. Had to learn to sit on a piece of wood instead of a chair because there was no room for chairs or anything like that, no tables.
It was just part of what the viewers started to like. But what I think was the secret to it was actually the fact that it was a family, an average family. We didn't do things that the ordinary bloke couldn't do.
When we went to sign up with 9 for the Ask the Leyland Brothers series, they said to make sure that we didn't make it too slick because they want it to look like The Boys Next Door, sort of an amateur home movie look.
It was as if we were going, our own family was going and taking the movie with our own little Super 8 camera. And I think that was the charm of it. I think they're very astute.
If there's anything you want to know about this great continent of ours, then ask the Leyland Brothers.
What do you reckon we are, Mike?
Buggered if I know now.
So let's have a big, glad to be alive hand for 2 rugged adventurers. The Starsky and Hutch of the Dead Centre. The fabulous Leyland Brothers!
And I don't think Mike and Mal ever complained about the parodies and the put-downs. They were always put down as these amateurs and so forth, and it just gave them more and more publicity.
The biggest advantage was that they had a positive image, a very positive image. No one ever said no. As soon as you mentioned Leyland Brothers, it was, oh yeah, because they were almost seen as family and friends.
The old saying about hard work not hurting anybody seems to be true. We discovered this when we were down here in Tasmania.
The ratings were phenomenal. About 40% of the number of people that were watching TV on any one night watching our show.
And then we've got another story for you, which is about a man who...
So I'm a classic example of somebody who grew up with the Leyland Brothers. So the kids who grew up watching the Leyland Brothers, myself included, are now buying their four-wheel drives and their caravans and their campers, and they're going out and doing the adventures that Mel did. I'd probably say that a lot of the grey nomad phenomenon, it could almost all be traced back to Mel and Mike getting out there in their four-wheel drives and exploring Australia.
In 1983, we decided to make a new direction for our career. Instead of just continuing with television, we wanted to get into tourism.
The range is broken by various gorges. The most spectacular is Kings Canyon.
We felt that we were running out of the adventurous places to go. I always took the view that you can't be popular on television forever. One day you'll wake up and no one will want you anymore.
Certainly a number of people have criticised that their production style wasn't that professional by modern standards, and so the Leyland Brothers works began to look a bit amateurish, and I suppose ultimately in time they got out of fashion.
Behind us you can see part of Leyland Brothers' world. This has taken us 7 years to create.
Mike and I had looked at the idea of building a big tourist park for quite a few years, and then one day Mike confronted me with the idea that he thought that what we really needed was some really big thing to attract people. So instead of building our little timber building, we eventually decided to build a replica of Ayers Rock. And we ended up having to borrow a lot of money to do it.
next thing you know, the interest rates had gone up to 26%. And what we'd borrowed had just doubled, and then it started to get like a big snowball.
And it was a nightmare. It started out as a dream and it turned into a nightmare. Just before we opened Leyland Brothers, well, we had about 26,000, I suppose, in cheques that hadn't been yet presented to the bank. And they fronted up and said that they weren't going to honour these cheques unless we provided additional security. Well, we didn't have any additional security. And then they said, oh, what about your houses? We said, well, no, those are always going to be protected. They're in the girls' names.
And I said, it's my house. And they said, well, you can't open if you don't sign your house over.
And I ended up doing the one thing I really regret. I talked her into it.
So in the end, after much persuasion, I signed the house over and I said, well, that's my house gone. And it was. They took it.
And we opened. We were making a lot of profit. It was going like a rocket. But things were getting a bit tense with Mike as well. Mistrust had crept into our relationship and it had never been there before.
And inside, it's just like an outback town.
Rain and I had done a trip to Central Australia, which was a private trip. And then later he accused me of putting all those expenses for that through the company. And I couldn't believe that he didn't trust me. Of all people, of all things, what we'd been through. And then he turned around and accused me of ripping him off. The partnership that Mike and I had for 29 years was crumbling before my eyes. And I knew it would never be the same again. Our relationship was damaged permanently after that. And it never really recovered.
So the bank walked in, sent the receivers in, put new locks on, give us 20 minutes to get off the place, and it was the most devastating day I reckon I've ever gone through. We were absolutely broke, to the point where I had to go bankrupt.
That's the day my life collapsed. Everything we'd worked for, all our lives, everything was tied up in that one project, and on that day the receivers walked in and took possession of the whole lot. I felt like shit, to be perfectly honest. In hindsight, Leyland Brothers World was a huge mistake. Biggest mistake we ever made. We walked away with $5,000. That's all we had. It was a lifetime's work, and our personal estate was worth $6.5 million before we built the park. And I didn't really mind losing the money. I objected to being treated like a criminal because I lost the money. And that's what really hurt.
The receivers, though, claim the Leylands are far from being down and out. They say that though totally legal, Mike and Mal transferred more than $1 million of assets into their wives' names over an 18-month period.
But it was during that period that the media started chasing us.
Who's come off worse, Leylands that still live in their big houses, or the people, the bank, the local people that have lost their jobs?
It's a big joke, it is.
Our main house was in her name, but the bank took that anyhow. Apart from that, we had another terrace house in Newcastle, which had a debt on it, but that was sold.
What gives them the right to not pay their bills? I mean, we've got bills, we've got to pay them.
Yeah, they put these people on who claimed to be creditors, only one of which I knew. As far as I'm aware, we paid our bills.
We all have this impression of people who go bad in an industry that they've got it all away somewhere in their wife's name and they haven't really lost anything. Well, they did. It wasn't that they walked away and were still wealthy people.
It's absolutely rubbish. They had absolutely nothing. They'd lost it all. And today they basically have no money.
Mike and I had our differences prior to that. And since there was now nothing left that we jointly owned, there was no need for us to stay together in partnership. So for the first time we went our separate ways.
This is Mike and Mal Leyland, two young Australians who've become legends in their own country.
For a while we didn't communicate with each other at all.
I said, look, forget the what ifs, that's all finished. Look ahead, that's the only way you can go.
And then I realised that times were very difficult when Mike wrote a book and Mal told me he wasn't going to read it. And I realised then that there'd obviously been a complete split up, which was very, very sad.
Yeah, well, Mike came out of it financially better than me in several ways. He bought, resold. He went into a couple of different business ventures, all of which were very successful. Well, Lorraine and I ended up with very little money, but we had enough to buy a little bit of land. And we moved on to 25 acres of pretty rugged, poor quality bushland just out from Glen Innes. We had nothing. We had to start from the ground up. Lorraine and I were living in a couple of shipping containers.
Look, I was shocked when I went up to see Mal and Lorraine. It was absolutely clear to me that they were in terribly desperate financial situation. They'd gone from being very, very wealthy, being multi-millionaires in a period of about 15 years to being close to destitute.
And then a week later I went to the mailbox out in the road and there was a letter from Dick. I opened it up and inside was a cheque for $10,000. I thought it won the lotto. I couldn't believe it. And he just said on it, to help with your project.
The place Mal built at Glen Innes was absolutely indicative of his attitude to life. He just got out and went back to basics, and with whatever little money he had, they started to build the place, literally with his own hands. He bought a mill, he cut the trees down on the property, he milled the timber, he built the building, he did it all.
It's a big, big effort. And I'm not 100% fit, so I have to time myself and pace myself very slowly.
Well, not long after the collapse of Leyland Brothers World, I discovered I had cancer in the bladder. I had a huge tumour, which required surgery to be removed.
We've had some success with potatoes already, and that's encouraged us to think the soil here is probably pretty good for them.
I think growing our own food and living off what we grew ourselves, getting rid of all the chemicals out of our lives, made a huge difference to my health. And I defied the odds.
G'day, I'm Mal Leyland. My wife Lorraine, our daughter Carmen and her husband Robert have already completed one full circuit of Australia on a...
Once we got back into television, doing what we knew best, we finally started to get on our feet. This led to us making a new TV series, which we did for the Nine Network.
We follow a walking track which leads to Ben Hall's cave.
We'll show you Australia. But at the same time, Mike, unbeknown to me, had the same idea. And he started running around filming a series which went on the 7 Network. Commercial networks being what they are, they put them up against each other.
Mushroom Rock's a good place to stop and have a bit of a break.
When we go away shooting now, Mike and I go together, we're just a team, the two of us. It's very fulfilling and very satisfying. We're doing exactly what we want, and I don't have to answer to anybody but myself.
Yeah. I wanted to get together with Mike and bury the hatchet a bit. I hadn't seen Mike for about a few years, probably 4 years or so. There's Mike.
One time we were at home, I was out in the kitchen and I heard this hello, hello, and I thought, who's that?
And I heard a car pull up and there was Margie got out of the car and started walking towards us, and then there was this old man behind him who I didn't recognise. And I got a shock when he got closer and I realised it was Mike. He was all stooped over, he looked ill, and one side of his face was sort of drooping.
And that's when we found out he had Parkinson's disease.
And he knew he didn't have long to go. And he wanted to come and see me before he did.
He wasn't aware of people much. You know, it's terrible to see him like that.
Sometime later I got a call to say we should come down and see him because he wouldn't have long to go. He was sitting in his chair and I said, how would you like to do one more trip? and this little glint came in his eye and one side of his face moved. And he mouthed the only two words he said while I was there. He said, "One more." I tell you, that really hit me. And I just turned around and I said, "I've got to go." And I did this thumbs up thing like that we used to do to the camera together. You know, I just did that. And he tried to raise his arm to do it. And I knew it was the last time I'd see him, so I just said, "I've got to go now, mate. I can't stay any longer." And it was the last time I saw him alive. And unfortunately, it meant that I couldn't have the discussion with Mike that I wanted to have. I wanted Mike to know that I had never been that dishonest person he thought I was. I wanted him to understand that that wasn't what had happened. I wanted to bury the hatchet on that. I wanted that to be gone and dealt with. It was something I never got the chance to do.
Mike Leyland, the cameraman, wants to film the wet. Mike's brother Mal and his wife Lorraine will record the sounds along this unusual journey to the wet.
Their place in television history, the Leyland Brothers, it's there forever. Historically, the films are incredibly important, especially because of the genre, the fact that they're not overly professional. They're not the magnificent Attenborough-type BBC production.
I'll stand about here and we get...
Just the background
with the lake in the background there will do. I've now got what I hope will be my final best film, which will be a film that shows a life of self-sufficiency against the odds. For years I've always dreamed of living a self-sufficient life, being able to grow our own food and our own bit of land. I hope it's not my last film, but I think this will probably be the most important one I make in a way, because I want people to be inspired by it. I want people to realise that that you don't have to have a lot of money, you just have to have a bit of determination to get through things.
Monday. Or maybe we can bring him down here.
Mal has written a book, and in reading that book, to me, it's pathos. It's so sad. Hopefully, I mean, it has a happy ending in the way that Mal and Lorraine are still together, and they're happy together.
No, I haven't.
But what a roller coaster.
And I'm going to continue to live it to the fullest. And I'll still have a camera in my hand when I fall off my perch.